Hello, wherever you're from. Thank you for joining us. This is the Q&A for day 2. Day 2 is on tier 2, that important intermediary level of support. I often think about what happens when we don't have that level of support. We have really good tier 1, we have tier 3, but there's no middle game to be played in town. What happens in our school systems? If you can, I would love to hear. Where are you from? What's your name? And if you can, drop a little bit of weather information. I would love to get a sense of what are you dealing with. I see sun from my vantage point right now. I'm from Minneapolis. We've organized 3 days of asynchronous presentations on topics that hopefully are digging into implementation, the complex issues that ultimately need to be addressed if we're going to bring to life a framework that has pretty ambitious and lofty goals. MTSS is about making sure every kid is able to access what they need. Now, that's a lofty undertaking. It's a worthy cause, but there are things that could make that challenging. You see some Minnesota people, Spokane, sunny California, have to rub it in. Colorado Springs. Oh, Liz. We have one of our employees who lives in Colorado Springs. And it's chilly though, huh? I'm going to give it another minute and then we're going to just jump into this Q&A session. Really, this is time to spend together to, if you feel you have any questions, make those known in the chat. If you don't have any questions right now, I have a few planted questions we can dig in together and explore. But this is really a capstone to day 2 on tier 2. Atlanta, and it's nice, huh? I want to be with you. I want to be able to say beautiful weather. All right, I'm going to get us going here. Sam's already coming out of the gates. I really like to know where I can find a matching tool after implementing a universal screener. That's a biggie when it comes to tier 2. Those diagnostic assessments. In the jargon world of MTSS, diagnostic assessments are what we do after we screen and detect that a student has a need. We then got to figure out what's at the root cause for why the student needs exist, so we can then inform the selection of a really precise intervention. At Character Strong, we have what's called the CST2, Character Strong Tier 2 matching tool. It's a way of tailoring and connecting students to precise interventions that target the hypothesized root cause that explains why the student's need exists. And I'm happy in a little bit here to dig in a little more about how that tool works. So I want to just do a little recap of today. We had a variety of presenters who talked on the topic of tier 2 on how to get it right. We're sitting on decades of policy, really, that promote multi-tiered system of support, whether it's through PBIS frameworks, RTI models. Multi-tiered frameworks have been around for a while, yet most schools are struggling to get to the outcomes. And one of the reasons why is implementation is challenging and difficult. So what's not that typical about this MTSS Summit? It's not talking about what to do. It's often exploring what's going wrong, because when we dig into what's going right, we identify the things that actually need to be solved for and addressed in order to get things right. Tomorrow's going to be on tier 3. We have Dr. Sharon Hoover, who is the co-director of the National School Mental Health Center out of the University of Maryland. I would really encourage you to check that out. We had an amazing panelist group who shared their thoughts and various vantage points they play from the district level to the building level around Tier 3 supports for students. And I would really encourage you not to miss that presentation. So I want to open up with a question, and I will return back to the questions in the chat there. Why is Tier 2 even needed? If you think about it, why is it even needed? Let's imagine a world without Tier 2. In many schools, they don't really have a high-functioning Tier 2 level of support available. What happens when we don't have a really robust Tier 2 system of support in place? Why do we even need it? Give you a moment here to think about it. You can take this question down to the level of Tier 1. Why is Tier 1 even needed? We know Tier 1 is just language that says, that communicates the foundational supports that every student should access and receive daily and consistently to be well, to promote their sense of belonging, and ultimately engage fully in learning experiences that set them up for life success. If students aren't accessing those core Tier 1 experiences, we know there's way too many students who look like they need an intervention because they're not getting those foundational experiences. Why is Tier 2 needed? If Tier 2 is not in place, way too many students look like they need Tier 3 supports or special education because we don't have an intermediary level of preventative supports that students access. And so students with needs start to all look like they need Tier 3, and it overwhelms the capacity of the school system. Yeah, in a perfect world, every student would respond to Tier 1, but we know there are reasons for a variety of ways, either biologically, from the environment. Students have needs that are in addition to Tier 1. And so we often know that there's at least a subset of students, 15% or so, that express needs for support in addition to Tier 1, even if you have a robust Tier 1 level of support. So we think about the Tier 2 as a necessary but insufficient to meet the needs of all students. There are a few students who are going to need that Tier 3 level of support. So we've been up to some things at Character Strong. It's called Character Strong Tier 2. It's a solution we're bringing together to address all the pieces to try to get Tier 2 right. Because Tier 2 isn't an intervention. Tier 2 is not just about screening. Tier 2 is really a solution that represents a system of care that gets activated, hopefully in an early, timely way, so students are able to get that early intervention. And it's in addition to Tier 1. So here's another question. Should we wait until Tier 1 is fully implemented with fidelity before taking on Tier 2 work? I call this the kicking the Tier 2 can down the road. We see a lot of school systems keep kicking the Tier 2 can down the road because they're not yet implementing Tier 1. So I'd just love to hear some of your thoughts. We have our thoughts, often driven by some of the research we've done to suggest, should we be moving on both fronts? Should we wait until we have Tier 1 in place? Yeah, I love that, Will. Yeah, it's messy, but if not now, then when are we going to do it? We do have students who have needs, and we continue to adopt a wait to fail phenomenon in our schools. Now we can go eyes wide open, though. Without a robust Tier 1 support system, way too many students are going to look like they need Tier 2 supports. That's why we have to have a process of triage. Triage means, based on the needs that are there, who are we going to rule in or rule out for care? And so we recommend that all schools have a triage process, because if you universally screen and detect a student as having a need, it doesn't mean that you're legally on the hook to provide Tier 2 or Tier 3. So the example we often give is, if I'm your primary care physician and you come in and I take your blood pressure reading and you have high blood pressure, That doesn't say I must perform open heart surgery on you or prescribe medication right away. What that screener does is say, hey, look into this, do the diagnostic and figure out what's going on. A better support could be pushing back into tier 1 health behaviors rather than activating a more intensive support. So we can handle this kind of dilemma of moving forward with tier 2 while we're also trying to move forward and incrementally and continuously improve tier 1 supports. So we have a triage process. We have a whole methodology that gets inserted as part of a broader problem solving process. And I'll give you a glimpse and I'll talk a little bit of what that looks like. So what are the purposes of tier 2? Why do we need to do it? If you believe in early intervention, you have to believe in tier 2. And if you believe in early intervention, then you have to believe in things like universal screening. The whole purpose of tier 2 is to provide early, timely, targeted support, and I'll operationalize what I mean by that in a second, as close to the time when a student's need emerges at any point in their educational history. So that's one purpose. We also are trying to increase the precision and amount of support students receive. Tier 2 is in addition to tier 1, not in replacement of. But what we need to do, because tier 1 may not be enough for the student, we got to get more precise. And we get more precise by identifying the root cause that explains why the need exists. And we're going to give more support. We're going to essentially increase what we call the dosage of support students receive. They're going to get more of it because it's in addition to tier 1. And last, this isn't a teacher spectator sport where we say, guess what? You're primarily responsible for tier 1 because you interface with students most within classroom context, and you also get to do tier 2 and others get to watch you do it. Tier 2 is a team-driven problem-solving process. That's what gets activated when we start to do tier 2 work. A team comes into play to put supports in place and follow a coordinated problem-solving process. So here's another question. What are the biggest challenges, though, with getting tier 2 right? All of this back here, doesn't that sound amazing when we put it on paper, a slide deck that looks colorful? It's like, oh, heck yeah, let's do it. But bringing that to life in everyday school context is the biggest challenge. What are the biggest challenges with getting tier 2 right? Adult behavior. It might seem like hyperbole, but I like to say all the issues with regard to the outcomes we want for students boil down to adult behavior. Adult behavior has to change on some level, whether it's a superintendent's behavior, whether it's building leaders' behavior, whether it's a school counselor's behavior, whether it's a teacher in a classroom's behavior, whether it's behaviors of community partners. Ultimately, for students to access what they need, adult behavior change is going to be pivotal to that process. Yeah, not having a team in place, because the team is the conduit to drive forward that problem-solving process, to wrap around the supports for the students. Being able to match the student to a correct intervention is a challenge. Where a lot of our efforts are wrought with imprecision. Ultimately, students aren't receiving the properly matched support. So there's lots of little pieces we got to get right to get tier 2 right. Here are some of the struggles that we notice in the work that we do. Some of the things, and if you can, just like, if this resonates with you, put a 1 in the chat. I would love to hear from you. Some schools have a one-size-fits-all. There's one game to be played, and when it comes to a tier 2 support, so everybody gets that intervention, whether it works for you or not. I like to imagine what if we were all in the same place together, say, let's go out to happy hour. But there was only one drink on the menu. What do you think the problem would be if there's multiple of us and there's only one option for happy hour? Some people, it's going to be precisely the thing they like and want. Others, they're not even going to want it. So when we don't have a menu of supports and we have a one-size-fits-all approach, we can't match students to more precise interventions. Sometimes we also see that Tier 2 becomes a way to label students, and students become labeled as that's who they are. They are a Tier 2 student or they're a Tier 3 student. So we often work to create strength-based language. Tier 2 is not a label of a student. Tier 2 is a system of support that gets activated based on need. No student would come and introduce themselves and say, hey, my name's Tier 2. We see a lot of it is fragmented and it's patchwork. There's lots of dots that need to be connected to get things right. And if those dots aren't connected, ultimately things get disjointed and students don't necessarily receive a highly effective support process. A lot of trial and error that we're throwing the mud at the wall and hoping it sticks. There's a lot of guesswork in this instead of a really precise, proven process that a group of people follow faithfully and with fidelity to make sure they're wrapping around an effective support process around the student. Imprecision, that students aren't matched to the proper and precise supports, and ultimately limited return on investment. That people are spending lots of time and energy for a subset of students with higher levels of need, but they're not getting that return on investment with positive student outcomes. Yeah, so the last four, I'm seeing Sam, that the last four on your campus, and I love how we'll go Bills every time. One size and imprecision, they do go hand in hand. Like if we only have one, guess what? You can't precisely match the student to an intervention. The student is forced into an intervention option. What we've been trying to think about is how do we design a solution to help provide schools with a menu of targeted supports. That menu then allows us to select which from the array of options is likely to be the most effective one. We use data. We got to move away from kind of deficit labeling students through what feels like a stigmatizing process to more strength-based language, that this is about empowering students, helping students access what they need. The system of support is what Tier 2 is. It's not a term that we then label students with. We got to connect all the dots. All the resources and tools and interventions have to be in one place. As long as they're fragmented and not connected, ultimately it results in low fidelity and schools don't get a return on investment. Instead of trial and error, we have to have a coordinated process that takes that guesswork out of it, and we just stick with the process. Imprecision, we need to turn into precise targeted supports that are tailored to the root cause. And we use data to figure out what that root cause is. And then from the menu of targeted supports, which of those supports aims to address that hypothesized root cause. And last, because of the amount of time and energy educators are already spending trying to meet the needs of students, we got to get a return on the investment through greater efficiency and ultimately effectiveness with impact on student outcomes. So what we've been doing is designing a solution. We call it Character Strong Tier 2. We're trying to bring all the tools, the interventions, and the professional learning all into one easy to access place. This is the solution. There's 5 different features. One of the hallmarks is there's a 5-step coordinated problem-solving process to help schools integrate language, common language, around the problem-solving process that a team will adhere to once Tier 2 gets activated for a student. But teams need supports to get really high functioning, because the whole problem-solving process will only work as well as the team's working. And so we have a variety of resources to guide that. In terms of the menu of supports, we have 2 different menus. We have small group curriculum that teaches students skills that are currently lagging, emotion regulation and coping skills, social skills, executive functioning skills, all skills that are enablers to academic engagement and performance. And we have curricula across K2 through 5 middle school and high school. And then we also integrate what we call performance-based supports or interventions that are designed to motivate students. These interventions are for students who possess the knowledge and skills, but they need supports embedded in the environment to encourage, motivate, and nudge them to consistently apply the knowledge and skills they possess. One way we get precise is determining whether the student has an acquisition need and would benefit from a skill-focused support, or the student has a performance need and would benefit from a motivational support because they already possess the knowledge and skills. Now, the character strong matching tool is what we've designed and conducted research on. If you get that hypothesis correct, we believe the student has an acquisition need, then we further explore what skill area does the student have an acquisition need in, and that's where we precisely target the intervention. On the other hand, if we say the student doesn't have an acquisition need, but they have a performance need, which of the performance-based interventions has the motivational mechanism that's likely to be most effective at supporting the student to consistently apply the knowledge and skills they possess? And that is that diagnostic assessment at the beginning, where I believe, Sam, you mentioned that, being able to have a tool that helps tailor the precise intervention to the hypothesized root cause. And that's what we've designed. And then what comes along with this is ongoing, never-ending professional learning, monthly live professional learning and coaching. And we have asynchronous modules that people can access more nimbly at their fingertips for professional learning. Regardless of whether you would go and be interested in a system like we've created with Character Strong Tier 2, these are all the pieces that ultimately have to come together to start to connect the dots and build an effective Tier 2 support system. Here's the problem-solving process. This is the language we use. There's all kinds of different problem-solving models, but we've designed it as such. There's 5 steps. These aren't just linear. You might have a cycle and return back to different steps when you're supporting a student. But step 1 is detect and triage. The first step is we got to engage in proactive detection. And then we got to, based on the students who get identified, we then have to triage to rule them in or out. And a triage is a process of prioritization based on needs and capacity. What is our capacity? Step 2 is where the magic happens when it comes to tailoring precise supports. We got to define the need. We got to analyze why the need exists by identifying the root cause. And based on the root cause, we need to select a precise intervention from among a menu. But once we select that intervention, we better develop a plan. And we need really good plans that break down the core components of the intervention and assign responsibility for who's going to do those core components and when, to increase the probability that in step 4, we will implement the intervention with fidelity so we can answer the question, yep, the kid did receive the intervention, and we can monitor the student's progress in response to that intervention. Last, because we've gathered data on both fidelity and the student's response, we got to come together and review that data and make a decision as to the next action step we'll take to support the student. So my question for you is, where do we tend to see a breakdown in Tier 2 according to a process? And you may have a different problem-solving model, but it's kind of the same song to a different tune. Which steps here do you tend to see a breakdown when it comes to people coming together, adults, and engaging in a problem-solving process to support a student? When we look at it, step 2 can get a little squirrely sometimes because we really don't have a method to analyze the root cause and then select a precise intervention. Sometimes we don't really gather much data. We start implementing an intervention, but we never gathered baseline data. We don't gather progress monitoring data after the fact, and we don't have any intervention fidelity data on the degree to which the student even received the intervention as planned and likely to be effective, which then compromises our ability when it comes to step 5. We're left with limited information to base a decision on. And many of us have probably been in a team meeting where you're staring at one another and you have no data to engage in a conversation. And we know how those conversations can go. So here's a question. Throw this one out. What methods do you currently use to proactively detect and screen students to activate early, timely Tier 2 support? So what do you have? What data do you gather to try to proactively detect and screen? That's all about being able to engage in early intervention. If we don't have tools and methods, then we may engage in what's called wait to fail, where typically what happens in schools, the student's need has to get bigger and juicier, and then the need can't be ignored, and then we go to activate a support, but now it's not early intervention, it's considered late intervention. So using co-vitality, that's Michael Furlong out of UC Santa Barbara, and the work really out of California. It's an index, it's more of a strength-based screener for SEL. And then it seems like you're also using existing data around attendance and academics area with decision rules. Yep, always evolving our work. We did not have a screening process until January 2023. We basically had subjective reporting. Yep, I mean, that's the most common in most schools. It's teacher referral processes. It's asking the adults, and it's grounded in really the tolerance level of the adult. And so if the adult recommends you for support, then you have an opportunity to receive a support. Maybe you don't even need a support because essentially you might not be getting Tier 1, but it's one of the most unreliable methods. And there are easier ways to shift from what we call subjective teacher referral to more objective, structured student nomination by providing operational definitions of need and providing examples and non-examples. And we have some of those metrics as part of our Character Strong Tier 2 solution. What happens when there are way too many students who look like they need an intervention than you have the capacity to serve? Okay, this is the dilemma. This is real. What happens when there are way too many students who look like they need an intervention than you have the capacity to serve? What do? You can't handle them. We call it your capacity rate. Most schools have a certain amount of capacity in terms of how many students they could reasonably handle. We have to turn, exactly. We got to turn to Tier 1. We got to drive, it's called the base rate. The base rate is the number of students who get detected as having a need. And it's really a barometer of the health of the Tier 1. So when it's too high, we got to actually double down in Tier 1. And we got to drive that base rate lower while also triaging, because we only have a certain capacity to meet the needs of students in Tier 2. The others, we're going to lean in and push into Tier 1, like Brenda's saying. So I want to just open it up for Q&A. I know we have a couple of minutes left. If you're interested at Character Strong, we take Tier 2 very seriously. When I was a professor, I was a school psych. Before that, a middle school math teacher. Students who have needs that aren't necessarily being addressed in the foundation has always been my passion. We've conducted research for over a decade to try to figure out how do we get Tier 2 right and bring all the solutions together in one place. And that's what we've tried to design with Character Strong Tier 2. That will become fully available in the end of April, but you can check out samples, and there's other ways on the Not Your Typical MTSS Summit to check out some of the stuff we're doing. But we're always happy to engage in conversation, to talk about and troubleshoot some of the challenges you might be experiencing to bring Tier 2 to life. So Q&A, do you want to talk about Tier 2? We can talk about the summit, or we can talk about, tax season coming up, or anything. So what do you got? If you have anything, go ahead in the chat. I'm here. We got a couple of minutes. Other than that, I'm going to wish you all well. Really encourage you to check out that day 3 with tier 3. There's some really good stuff packed into that day. So we'll be matching. Will the matching tools diagnostic only be available in? No, we actually have that, and we'll showcase that. We have one of our monthly professional learning. I think it's the next one here in February. We're going to dive in onto step 2 on really how do you analyze why the need exists using a tool like the matching tool to be able to get at that root cause. Once you get the root cause, then how can you get to precision intervention, whereby you've selected something that there's a higher probability if it's implemented with fidelity, you'll get to outcome. So what are the costs of tier 2? It is $19.99 annual renewal. What I like to say is the professional learning, the live professional learning we're providing is up to 12 to 15 hours per year, which we've estimated is easily 10 to 15,000 bucks to get live professional training and coaching on a monthly basis forever. That comes along with it. Then you get all the menu of targeted supports. We have small group, skill focus curriculum and emotion regulation and coping, social skills, and executive functioning, the performance-based interventions. If you need it, there's screening tools. We have processes around triage. And we also, on the back end, to monitor the progress of students' response to the intervention, we have progress monitoring tools, brief little software that you can graph the data as you gather it so you can visualize the student's response to the intervention. So all that comes along with that solution and what people would get for that $19.99 cost. And it's coming out at the end of April. We already purchased this idea that we were working with our teams on the last session, team roles, rubrics, and this next time we work with matching. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a launch. What we're considering this is building some momentum, thinking first about establishing a team, giving that team some grace to build some collective kind of knowledge and some common language. We would encourage people to be thinking about really robust implementation going into next academic year, but giving yourself a runway, that launch, to create some significant readiness with your staff and start to build capacity around using some of the tools when it comes to things like matching, getting your triage process dialed in, and those things. So we'll be spiraling back to that. And we also will be offering a more substantive professional learning experience for teams that we will have specific dates that people can sign up in the future. All right, we are over time. Thank you for tuning in to the Q&A for day 2 of the Not Your Typical MTSS Summit. I really thank you for those of you who showed up in the afternoon here to engage in the Q&A. Again, I would encourage you to check out tomorrow in tier 3. And other than that, be well and take care. Thanks for tuning in.